Okay, welcome to your lesson on day 2 of inequalities. This is occurring on Thursday, April 2nd. So in this lesson, we're going to solve each inequality and we're going to graph the solution on a number line. Now I ask that as you go through this lesson that you write down the examples and work them out with me, as that will be very valuable practice and helping you learn how to solve inequalities. So the first thing we want to do when we read an inequality is we just want to do that. We want to read it about how we would say this. So I'm going to read 2a as 3 is greater than or equal to g plus 7. So the reason that I say 3 is greater than or equal to is because my alligator mouth, which I like to call my inequality sign, is open towards the 3. It's open towards the left, and the alligator always goes for the bigger side, just like an alligator is going to always choose the bigger, juicier prey. So 3 is greater than or equal to g plus 7. So I'm going to think about what this means. So 3 is going to be larger or equal to g plus 7. So I'm going to start by drawing a line through my inequality sign, just like I do when I'm solving an equation. And my goal is to get g by itself, so I'm going to circle that. Now that is a positive 7 on the same side as the g, so I'm going to have a negative or subtract 7 from each side. 3 minus 7 is negative 4, so I have negative 4 is greater than or equal to g, and my 7 minus 7 is 0, so I can draw a line through that. Now, one thing you need to get in the habit of is writing an inequality with your variable on the left. In this problem, my variable is on the right. This is right, this is left. So I want to write my variable first because that's the easiest way to read an inequality. So I'm going to rewrite my answer as g, which I want to have come first. Be careful with your inequality sign. The inequality sign is facing away from my g. So again, my inequality sign is going to face away from my g. And then my negative 4 is on the right. So my answer is g is less than or equal to negative 4. So on my number line, which I didn't give you, we're just going to draw one. This is negative 4. Everything above is larger. Everything to the left is smaller. We have a less than or equal to sign, so I'm going to shade negative 4 because my answer could include negative 4. And then notice how my inequality sign is pointing to the left. I'm going to just think of that as an arrow pointing left. It's an arrow pointing left, and I'm going to shade my number line to the left because my answer could be negative 4 or anything less than that because g is less than or equal to negative 4. So that is my full answer worked out. Okay, let's try a few more. Solve 3 is less than or equal to b minus 1 1/3. So I'm going to draw my river through my inequality sign, circle my variable. That's what I get to last. I'm going to add 1 1/3 to each side. The reason I add is because this is a subtraction or a negative, and opposite of negative is positive or addition. 3 plus 1 1/3 is 4 1/3. And I have that is less than or equal to b, and negative 1 1/3 plus 1 1/3 cancels out. Now remember what I said about rewriting your inequality with your variable on the left. So I'm going to rewrite this as b. I can see that my inequality symbol is open towards b, so I'm going to leave it like that, and then write what I have on the right, 4 1/3. So all I've done is I've just changed the position and rewritten my inequality from left to right. So we read this as b is greater than or equal to 4/3. So I would have a shaded dot at 4 1/3, and then think of this as an arrow. I would shade my number line to the right. Okay, so let's just try a couple more with addition. These are pretty straightforward. I'm going to draw my river through the equal sign, circle my variable. This is a positive 10, so I'm going to subtract 10 from each side. 10 minus 10 is 0, and I'm left with y is less than -7. Now in this case, my variable is on the left, so I will shade my number line starting at -7 with an open circle. Think of this as an arrow. I would shade the number line to the left because my answer could be anything less than -7. Here I've got x plus 7 is greater than or equal to 10. So I, again, can think about this, circle my variable, subtract 7 from each side. Notice I always have to do the same thing to each side. 7 minus 7 is 0, and I'm left with x is greater than or equal to +3. Now again, notice how my variable is on the left. That's what I want. I would have a closed circle at 3 on my number line because my x could be equal to or include +3. And then I'm going to shade my number line to the right, thinking of this inequality sign as an arrow. Okay, let's wrap up with a few examples that require us to use multiplication and division. So I'm going to have you write this problem down, draw your river through the equal sign, or I'm sorry, inequality sign, and we would read this as 4 times a number, 4 times x, is greater than -36. Now to undo this multiplication, opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide each side by 4, by a +4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and I'm left with x is greater than -9. Remember, when you divide two numbers with the same sign, you get a positive. If you divide two numbers with different signs, negative and positive, you get negative. So my answer is x is greater than -9. So I would have an open circle at -9 because I have a greater than sign. Think of this as an arrow, and I would shade my number line to the right at -9. So what that means is that if you were to plug in any number that is larger than -9, any number that is larger than -9 for your x, this side will be greater than -36. Okay, for 26, I have 7 times y is less than or equal to -49. I would divide each side by 7 to undo that multiplication between 7 times y, and I would get y is less than or equal to -7. So if I were to graph this on a number line, my variable's on the left, so I don't have to change the order. My variable's on the left, so I'm good. So I would have a closed circle because my answer could include -7. And then I would shade my number line to the left, the sign that my inequality is pointing in. So what that means is that any number that equals -7 or that is less than -7 will make this side less than or equal to -49. Okay, now this is a two-step inequality. All it means is that it takes 2 steps to solve. So I'd pause the video, write this down as we solve it together. I'm going to draw a river through my equal sign. And the first thing I'm going to do is circle my variable with the sign that is in front of it. In this case, it's subtraction, which we know that's the same as a negative. So I'm going to circle my -3n, and I tackle that last. So I need to move this 13 away from my variable. So opposite of a positive is a negative, which is the same as subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 13 from each side. 13 minus 13 is 0, and I'm left with negative 3 times n is less than negative 8 minus 13. Now, think of this like money. You start with $8 in debt, and then you spend $13 more that you don't have. So you are a total of $21 in debt. And when you're in debt, that's the same as a negative. You're below 0. You have no money. Okay, so now this is the part that is a little tricky. When you are dividing each side by a negative or multiplying each side by a negative, you have to flip the sign in the middle. I'll show you why in a little bit. So here I have negative 3 times n. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide each side by negative 3 to get my variable by itself. Anything divided by itself is 1, so I'm left with n is less than 7. My negatives cancel. Now, because I divided each side by a negative, I divided each side by negative 3, I have to flip my sign in the middle so that it faces the opposite direction. So my real final answer would be this. N is greater, see how I flipped the inequality sign to face the opposite direction? N is greater than 7. Now, here's why I have to flip the inequality sign, and I'm going to just give you an example really quick. You don't have to write this down. If I have negative 1 on the left and 10 on the right, and I wanted to have an inequality sign, I would have to write a less than sign to read this as negative 1 is less than 10. Negative 1 is less than 10. Now, I know that with an inequality, if I want to do something to one side, I have to do something to the other side of the inequality to keep it balanced. So I'm going to choose to multiply each side by a negative number. And remember, when I multiply by a negative, I have to flip the sign, and I'm showing you why. So negative 5 times negative 1 is a positive 5. I originally started out with a less than symbol. 10 times negative 5 is negative 50. Now, at this point, this inequality is not true. I have 5 on the left and negative 50 on the right, and I got that by multiplying each side by negative 5. So when I multiply each side by negative 5, all of a sudden 5 became bigger than negative 50, or my left became bigger than my right side. So I need to reverse the inequality sign that I started with to make this true. So my inequality would be 5 is greater than negative 50. So again, when I multiply by a negative or divide by a negative, I have to flip the sign so that my inequality is true. Here's one more quick example. 5 is greater than negative 2. If I divide each side by negative, well, let's do negative 5. If I divide each side by negative 5, which I divided by negative, I would have negative 1 is greater than positive 2 over 5 because my negatives cancel. Again, this is not true. A negative is not larger than a positive, so I have to flip my sign. Negative 1 is less than 2/5 will be correct. Okay, so hopefully you understood that. If you didn't, that is okay. You just need to remember that when you are multiplying or dividing by a negative with an inequality, you have to flip the sign. All right, we're going to wrap up with 2 more examples today. So here I've got 7 over 2 times y is greater than 63. So I want to get the y by itself. So to undo this multiplication, I'm going to multiply each side of my inequality by the reciprocal, which is 2 over 7. Okay, to undo multiplication with a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. My 2 divided by 2 is 1. My 7 divided by 7 is 1, so I'm left with y is greater than, and then I have to work on my right side. So 63 is the same as 63 over 1. And I know that I can divide 63 and 7 by 7. 63 divided by 7 is 9. 7 divided by 7 is 1. So 9 times 2 is 18. 1 times 1 is 1. And I don't write this as 18 over 1. I just write it as 18. So my answer is y is greater than 18. So I would have an open circle on my 18. Think of this as an arrow. And I'll shade to the right. All right, last problem we're going to do together. I've got 3 over 4 is less than or equal to negative 5 over 7m. Okay, so we read this as 3 over 4 is less than or equal to negative 5 over 7 times m. And just like in that last problem, I'm multiplying m by a fraction. So to undo that multiplication, I'll divide negative 5/7 by negative 5/7. And the way that I divide a fraction out is I multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 7 over 5. Negative 7 over 5. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now, when I multiply by the reciprocal, I will always get 1. So these cancel out. Negative 3 times 7 is negative 21. And 5 times 4 is 20. And I have less than or equal to m. Now, I need to be very careful here because I multiplied each side by a negative. And when I multiply each side by a negative, I multiply each side by a negative number, I have to flip the inequality sign. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 21 over 20 is greater than or equal to m. I just flip the direction of the inequality sign. So my last step, I always want my variable to be on the left, so I'll write that as m. My inequality sign is facing away from my m. M is less than or equal to negative 21 over 20, which that's the same as negative 1 and 1/20. So that would be my answer. So I would have a closed circle at negative 1 and 1/20, and then I would shade my number line to the right because m could be anything less than or equal to negative 21 over 20. All right, that is all for today. I have a short practice set for you that I will ask for you to submit on Canvas. Thank you guys for listening. This is your last lesson for the week. Tomorrow will be a catch-up day, and I will not give you any homework from me. I hope that you're doing well, and once again, thanks for listening. All right, bye.